presentation. I'm here with my colleagues, District Councilors Ed Flynn and Tim McCarthy, for a hearing on docket number 1087. I want to remind everybody that this public hearing is being recorded and broadcast live on channels Comcast 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964, as well as the City of Boston website. So if you could please silence your cell phones and other devices, and if anyone wishes to offer public testimony at the end, please check the box on the sign-in sheet. Again, today's docket is docket number 1087, sponsored by the Mayor and referred to the committee on July 11th, 2018. I have to read the docket for the record, so bear with me. It's message in order to declare surplus city-owned former Public Works Department parcels of vacant land and the transfer of the care, custody, management, and control of said property to the Public Facilities Commission. The land is located at 400 Frontage Road in South Boston, being Ward 8, parcel number 01024040. 200 Frontage Road in South Boston, being Ward 8, parcel number 01024035, as well as Frontage Road in South Boston, being Ward 8, parcels 01024036, 01024107, and 01024037. Would either of my colleagues like to give an opening statement before we hand it over to the administration representatives? No? Okay, so I guess just for background, we've had a few hearings this term on surplus. We'll get more into that, but the idea is that this is city-owned property with a request to transfer it to the commission that would then allow it for disbursement to any number of potential uses. All right, Chief?
Councilor, thank you so much for hosting this hearing. Sorry about the mic. Councilor Flynn, Councilor McCarthy, thank you for attending and for your engagement. As you said, we are here. We are seeking the council's support for surplusing the Frontage Road parcel, which is really the heart of the city's basic city services operation, and we are advancing that because we want to continue the exploration of a proposal that we think can do two things. One, strengthen our ability to deliver great basic city services in the city of Boston, and two, be able to actually strengthen and make more resilient the neighborhoods in our city. I am going to briefly go through some background on this that we've been sort of putting together over the last 8 months, and then so the panel of the five of us are open to all of your questions. I'm joined up here by Commissioner Gina Fiandaca, who leads our Transportation Department, Michael Brohl, who is our Superintendent of Street Operations, Heather Capasano, who is the Chief of Staff for the Boston Planning and Development Agency, and Tricia Lyons, who leads Property and Construction Management, represents the Public Facilities Commission as well. So in short, over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to try to do 4 things. One, just give some background about Frontage Road today, a little bit about where it is, who's working there, how the space is actually used. Second, talk a little bit about the pressing challenges that that particular parcel is facing and some of the opportunities that were identified through the city's public planning process, Imagine Boston 2030, for that parcel and the area around it. Third, talk a little bit about the research that has been done around best practices in municipal operations in other places, in other cities that are comparable to the city of Boston. And talk a little bit about some of the sort of initial feasible alternatives that have been identified by our lead partner on this project, our consultant team we engaged, led by UTIL. And then fourth, talk really about the process and the path ahead to an eventual decision, again, that can strengthen basic city service operations and improve our neighborhoods. So starting with sort of Frontage Road and where it is today, there we go. So we first wanted to start with the sort of where Frontage Road is. I realize this is less for the 3 of you, since the 3 of you know this quite well, including one of you who worked there, but more just for the broader audience. We want to really point out a couple things. We highlighted on this map 3 different parcels within the city of Boston. One is the one we're in today at the northern end, which is Boston City Hall. Then in the middle, you see South Station, and in the third, the one on the south, you see Frontage Road. We wanted to highlight these 3 parcels really for 2 reasons. One is to give a sense of scale, and the other is to give a sense of proximity. On the sense of scale, Frontage Road itself is about 18 acres. It is a very sizable parcel, again, the heart of the city's basic city service operations. And second, in terms of proximity, it is roughly equidistant to South Station as Boston City Hall is, so it's actually fairly close to the downtown core. In addition, it is actually in many ways a keystone parcel in Councilor Flynn's district at the intersection of South Boston, South End, and Chinatown. and we wanted to give sort of that geographical context. Second, the parcel is really, again, the heart of how we lead basic city service operations in the city of Boston. There's about 500 different city staff who report out of this area. The vast majority of them don't work day to day at this location. They are in our neighborhoods delivering city services on the streets, but I want to walk through sort of who works out of these particular facilities. The northern end of the Frontage Road is what we call 400 Frontage Road. Overwhelmingly, that area is sort of the Public Works team, the Public Works operations team that Mike oversees. That includes our highway operations, so everything from how we pick up community litter baskets and recycling baskets across the city to how we think about snowstorms and handle snowstorms in the city of Boston. The principal salt pile for the city of Boston is also on this location. It is what is the sort of notched out in yellow at the southern end of that particular image. Additionally is the district yard. It is the district yard for a couple of neighborhoods in the city of Boston. The district yards are the teams that deliver some of those really core city services like filling potholes, removing graffiti, addressing litter concerns, et cetera. For most of our neighborhoods, there is a district yard that is in the neighborhood itself, but we service all of South Boston, Charlestown, and all the neighborhoods that essentially are north and east of Mass Ave, so South End, Back Bay, downtown, North End, Chinatown, West End, et cetera, all out of this particular location. In addition, this is also the home to the city's waste reduction and code enforcement groups. Just before this hearing, Mike said that this particular day and this particular weekend is like a blizzard for our waste reduction and code enforcement team. It is student move-in weekend in the city of Boston. That is something which the Public Works Department, in collaboration with BTD and many other city agencies, spend a lot of time focused on. The waste reduction and code enforcement team are the teams that oversee the delivery of trash and recycling services and composting services across the city of Boston, as well as ensuring that things like litter in public spaces and unshoveled sidewalks are addressed in our city. Additionally, there are sort of components of several public works divisions that are housed here, but they are not entirely here. So a fraction of our street lighting division is housed here. A fraction of the city's engineering division is housed here, and a fraction of the city's sort of building maintenance and bridge maintenance group is housed here. In addition to the Public Works team, which is sort of the overwhelming sort of tenant within 400 Frontage Road, it is also the place where the Senior Shuttle, the Elderly Commission, dispatches its senior shuttle services across the city. It is also home in part to the Police Vehicle Maintenance Division and its radio and telecommunications shop. In addition, the city's Central Fleet Maintenance Unit is housed out of here, and the city's radio and telecommunications shop is housed out of here. And it's also a place where the Elections Department has some staff and has storage for various archives as well as equipment. At the southern end of the site is the site which is entirely within the purview of the Boston Transportation Department. And there, Commissioner Fiandaka's team has a set of services that are based out of. It is where the city's tow lot is, the city's auction lot is. There's about 250 spaces in the tow lot, another 75 in the auction lot. It's where the entire parking enforcement officers unit dispatches out of, and it's where our meter shop functions from. It's about 9,000 metered spaces in the city of Boston. Those parking meters are serviced out of this location here. Stepping back from the actual sort of who is there, part of what the UTL team looked at was how is that space actually used? Between that particular location and two other satellite locations that are currently in temporary use by both Public Works and Transportation, one on Canterbury Road for our street lighting division and one at 12 Channel Street for our sign and signal shop, there's about 1 million square feet of space. Overwhelmingly, that 1 million square feet is used actually for vehicle storage. About 60%, 59% of the land is actually for vehicle storage. And that breaks down into 3 different components. One set of that is for sort of large vehicle storage. A lot of that is Public Works equipment. That could be packers, that could be street sweepers, that could be snow blowers, things that are sort of core Public Works equipment. Another roughly 19% is for the city's tow lot and auction lot. Again, about 250 spaces for the tow lot and 75 for the auction lot. And the balance of the vehicle storage space, again, another roughly 19%, is dedicated to light vehicle storage. This is everything from employee parking to code enforcement vehicles and other sort of smaller vehicles that the city maintains as part of its fleet. Only 8% of the entire site is actually sort of what one would consider like traditional office space. That's everything from our sort of the headquarters of our highway operations and waste reductions divisions to the elections department staff. And then that remaining third is actually just storage and shop space, really our central fleet, police central fleet, the meter shop, storage for elections, et cetera. That's roughly the space breakdown of this area. That's essentially the broad context of what's at Frontage Road today. One of the things that the util team looked at were what are really the pressing challenges that are facing this particular site, and what are some of the opportunities that have been identified through Imagine Boston 2030. The challenges, and these are challenges that are fairly well known to all three of you. We have a set of old buildings. We have rising tides. This is a site that's in a floodplain, and currently the space is either outdated or somewhat inefficiently allocated. On the old building side, over the last 10 years, our city's invested around $27 million in some critical repairs and infrastructure on the Frontage Road campus. This includes everything from improvements to the main parking structure at 400 Frontage Road, some improvements to the central fleet area, things that simply have to be done. We've gotten support from Justin Starrett, who is here, who leads the budget office, to invest another $9 million into what will be a next round of necessary and critical repairs within the Frontage Road campus. That includes making some improvements to the sewer line, making some improvements to the water line, making some additional improvements to the curtain walls. There's an additional $12 million identified but unfunded need to do some additional work on floors 1 through 4 of the garage at 400 Frontage Road. The building sort of in total is sort of been identified as one that's basically reaching the end of its useful life. Our payments simply to keep it functioning at some point are going to outstrip the payments to actually build anew. And so we're grappling with that every day, and perhaps underscoring that this morning. One of the first notes that Mike and I received was the fact that the air conditioning is today out at Frontage Road. These are sort of the daily occurrences that are happening at particularly the 400 Frontage Road site, which is underscoring the need for us to actually act and act quickly, just to give our team the right type of facilities that actually they can work out of every single day. The second thing, which has been identified largely through the work of the Environment, Energy, and Open Space Cabinet and their work at Climate Ready Boston, is just the impact that sea level rise is going to have on this site and others across the city. Already this site has been identified as a place that in severe storms is likely to flood. In 2050, we're expecting around 21 inches of sea level rise. In 2070, we're expecting 40 inches of sea level rise. In both 2050 and 2070, this particular site, the entirety of the site, is identified as one which would likely be flooded out in a 10-year storm. The urgency and severity of this really, frankly, was pointed out very clearly on January 4th of this year. We got a snowstorm in the city of Boston, which was about a 14-inch snowstorm on that day. But what also happened is, because of the nor'easter that came at the same time, we also had significant flooding throughout the entirety of the tow lot, the entirety of 200 Frontage Road, and much of the core operational area of the 400 Frontage Road site. This is not a long-term challenge that we need to face. This is an immediate one, which is really a reminder to us that the core services that we need to provide and making sure that our city streets are great need to be reliable when the city most needs it. It can't be at risk to things like severe nor'easters. The third thing, which has been identified, and this is, again, sort of familiar to many of you, there's just an opportunity to sort of modernize and take a better look at how we organize our city services. One of the things that is just a challenge is, again, we've got a number of split divisions across multiple sites. The Transportation Department has some of its operations team out of 200 Frontage Road, some of its operation team out of 12 Channel Center. Most of our street lighting division is on Canterbury Road. Some of it is located here. Some of our engineering team is in City Hall. The rest of our engineering team is at Frontage Road. There's just an opportunity for us to have people who need to work together actually be together, and that's something which is of great interest to us. And we've also realized that, for those of you who are familiar with the site, at 400 Frontage Road, we've got a lot of we've got some interesting layout of spaces, which means that there's some inefficient uses of the way in which the current floor plates are used. And at the southern end of the site, at 200 Frontage Road, we actually have over 200 people working out of a very small building in a very space-constrained environment. And so there's a real opportunity for us to think about how we improve these spaces. These were sort of the broad challenges that were identified, and prior to the work by UTO, prior to the work that's happened over the course of this year, there was a set of work that was done through Imagine Boston 2030, the city's long-term sort of land use plan and vision, that identified some interesting opportunities for this parcel as part of a broader network. In Imagine Boston 2030, there were sort of 5 broad goals that were identified, goals around mixed-use downtown core, around enhancing our neighborhoods, around expanding our neighborhoods, around embracing the waterfront, and around connecting networks of opportunity. What is interesting about this particular parcel is that it basically shows up in 3 of the 5 major goals that were identified in Imagine Boston 2030. One of those major goals was thinking about how we sort of expand our neighborhoods or think about places that are well served by transit today, but that on most people's sort of mental map do not seem like necessarily part of the city. I want to be very clear that for Gina, Mike, and I, and for all of you, that we all feel that this area is very much part of the city, but I appreciate how in many of the public conversations people feel like this may be sort of a hole in the urban fabric between South Boston and the South End. And it was sort of identified that there's an opportunity here to think about how the northern end of the site in particular, the section of the site that connects with West 4th Street, that we can really think about how we redevelop this parcel to really help form a more of a connection between those 2 neighborhoods. This site also has the natural advantages of being just a 5-minute walk from a red line stop and a 5-minute walk from a silver line stop, which makes it sort of transit oriented because of its location, sort of at the head of the 4-point channel. It also plays a role in the overall sort of waterfront and resiliency strategy for the city of Boston. And then finally, the city's putting a lot of focus across the board at at the entirety of the Fairmount corridor. And the Fairmount line actually runs right adjacent to this parcel. So as we think about how we connect everybody who lives along the Fairmount line with great opportunities, there's a role that this parcel may be able to play. So these were some of the sort of opportunities that were identified in Imagine Boston 2030, sort of as we were doing this review over the course of this last year about this particular parcel. So given the challenges that this critical parcel is facing from outdated buildings and sea level rise, et cetera, and given some of the opportunities that were identified in Imagine Boston 2030, we gave a challenge to the consultant team that was to take a look at some of the best practices and how other municipalities are dealing with creating great basic city services operations and how other municipalities might think about sort of investments in improving the way in which they serve neighborhoods. And hand in hand with that, to help us identify not an exhaustive list, not a complete list, not a final list, but a list of are there alternative ways in which we can imagine our own footprint that actually can allow us to continue to deliver great basic city services. So first, on the best practices side, they highlighted 3. One is around densification. The second is around modernization. The third is around reorganization. Densification was sort of particularly clear in places that, like the city of Boston, are increasingly seeing sort of land values at a premium, where sort of increasing development is necessitating perhaps a sort of a higher density in the way in which basic city service buildings are constructed. Both New York City and LA have made investments in this regard. New York City with their sanitation team, and LA through their transit team, where they're basically taking sort of lower density buildings, more surface parking, and actually redesigning that space and creating sort of a higher density building as a way of saving space and more efficiently delivering services. So that was one best practice they identified. The second best practice they identified was around modernization of the technology that one uses to actually deliver services. This was particularly sort of clear around things like inventory management. There's a lot of inventory we handle around things like sign stock and parking meters and all of our street lighting equipment. Figuring out sort of new ways, better ways to be able to actually handle that inventory allows us to reduce space and actually manage our inventory more efficiently and effectively. And then third, there are sort of slightly conflicting models here. Cities have taken sort of two different approaches around reorganization. Charlotte took an approach of decentralization, of essentially taking services closer to neighborhoods, sort of breaking apart services and bringing them closer to the neighborhoods, perhaps more akin to what many of our public safety agencies do, and more akin to the way in which the Highway Division distributes district yards. And Manchester took essentially the alternative approach of centralization, where they brought together many of their city services in one single facility. So these are sort of the three best practices that the UTIL team sort of brought to us, and as part of that overall effort, then began to take a look at, are there alternative ways in which we can either reorganize on the Frontage Road site or at the Frontage Road site, an additional site, or entirely off the Frontage Road site, where we could actually still affordably and efficiently deliver great basic city services. And that's essentially led them to what you see on the left side of this screen, 6 different preliminary alternatives. And again, I just want to underscore that this is not intended to be an exhaustive list or even sort of in any way a final list, but the intent was just testing the feasibility of, can we reorganize how we deliver basic city services geographically and still do a great job of doing that. So one option was to consolidate entirely on a single site, and 2 options were identified, or 2 locations were identified there. One is the southern half of Frontage Road. So to take the northern half of Frontage Road, the area which is essentially abuts the West 4th Street Bridge, the area that's closer to things like the Broadway T-stop and the Silver Line, and redevelop that for other purposes, and use the southern half and take more of the New York City and LA approach of a slightly denser building on the southern half of the Frontage Road site. The other places they looked at for as a consolidation on a single site, it was Reed Street, which is a street which is adjacent to or right near the Boston Water and Sewer facility. These are sort of some options of how, again, in this case, on a 3-acre site, you can imagine bringing all services under one roof to be able to sort of more efficiently deliver city services. The second set of options they looked at were basically 3 different locations: Frontage Road, a city-owned parcel across from 1010 Mass Ave, basically at Mass Ave and Magazine Street, and then the Reed Street parcel, and looking at whether we could actually deliver great services at both, by being in both of those sites, by having essentially the Boston Transportation Department at one location and Public Works, as well as the Police Department, Elderly Elections, at another location. Those were the sort of second set of options they looked at. And the third set of options is really sort of following the Charlotte model of sort of broad sort of decentralization. So really thinking about, do we take more of our divisions sort of into our neighborhoods so that they are closer to the people that they actually serve. Across the board, I would say that the overall finding, and sort of a key reason why we're here, is that it is, while each of these are expensive and the overall cost is probably around $150 to $175 million for us to pursue any of these options, that's at least the initial estimate. It is likely less expensive for us to actually reduce our footprint on the Frontage Road site than it is to actually remain in our current formulation on that area. And that's largely because there's a number of environmental issues and principally sea level rise issues that happen on the northern end of the site. And second, as you look at the site in total, if we were to actually reconstruct on our existing footprint, we run into a significant operational challenge of how we continue to deliver great basic city services while we're actually reconstructing the entirety of the Frontage Road site. Second, by actually sort of redesigning our facilities overall, you get a good opportunity to think about how we can actually realign some of our divisions. So have our entire BTD operations group together, have our entire street lighting division together, have our engineering division together, so we can actually just be more effective at delivering our day-to-day work. And third, we can actually make sure that our team that is out there every single day delivering services on the street has the right kind of home base to be working out of, the right type of spaces to manage their inventory, to store their vehicles, and all those sort of things. So given this set of feasible alternatives, we now essentially are at a moment where we have not a decision, but a path to sort of making a decision that is in front of us. And that's basically what we want to walk through, and really is the intent of sort of why we're here today. First, from our work over the last 8 months, we just believe there's urgency here. We have seen Frontage Road already flood during a major storm when we had to respond to 14 inches of snow in the city of Boston. We saw it in January. We saw it in March. we are reminded at quite regular intervals of the fact that the current facilities are just reaching the end of their useful life. There's some urgency in acting. We can't do nothing and continue to expect to deliver great basic city services in the city of Boston. Second, we know that that this is not going to be an inexpensive effort. Around $150 million will be required for us to actually sort of reinvest in our basic city services capacity. We are quite familiar, and you guys are quite familiar with the implications of what that means. The entirety of the public works and transportation capital budget annually is roughly $40 million. So we'd be talking about the entirety of what we are spending on our streets for 4 years to basically rebuild or reinvest in our basic city services capacity. The good news, though, is that because of the work that has been done over the last 8 months, we think there's an interesting opportunity here. We think there's an opportunity to basically reduce our footprint at Frontage Road, or to be able to relocate off of Frontage Road, to free up some open space at the northern end of the site in particular, which allows us to deal with some of the resiliency and neighborhood connectivity issues, as well as get some additional funding that can help us, again, reinvest into basic city services and the infrastructure we've got in the city of Boston. So for us, in the path ahead, what that looks like essentially are these 3 specific steps. So first is the step that we've basically been taking over the course of 2018, which is some background research about who is at Frontage Road, how is that space being used, are there feasible alternatives that we could be looking at, is it worth it for us to continue this effort, and to be able to request your support in surplusing this property to shift it from one department to another so that we can actually proceed to what are steps 2A and 2B. Steps 2A and 2B are basically very important planning efforts, one which will be led in part through the BPDA and the other which in part will be led by the property and construction management team. One of those steps, what we're calling here step 2A, is basically a deep dive into identifying locations in the city of Boston, whether it's at Frontage or other places, where we will house our basic city services team in the future. Do that through a public process, go into the actual real details of what locations make sense, what divisions make sense together, what do the actual designs and layouts of those buildings look like, and what will the likely cost be. That's sort of section 2A. Section 2B is a joint effort essentially between the city and the BPDA to explore development opportunities at, again, sort of either the northern end or the entirety of the Frontage Road parcel. And this would be through a public RFP. That public RFP would, it would be very clear that it would follow a 30B process, that all proceeds less any minor expenses would go back to the city, and that no award would be made until we actually felt comfortable with what came out of 2A. And all of that, which would likely happen over the course of 2019 or beyond, would lead us to a decision moment which would be both before the City Council, the Public Facilities Commission, and the BPDA Board. We would need the support of the City Council to actually move forward on the basic city services investment, and the support of the BPDA and the Public Facilities Commission on any identification award of a most advantageous proposal for anything on the at the Frontage Road parcel. So that, in short, is sort of why we are here. Again, fundamentally what we were looking at is the challenge of continuing to provide great basic city services in the city of Boston, and a real opportunity here to think about how we realign our footprint at the Frontage Road site to not only improve the way in which we serve our neighborhoods, but also think about how we actually can strengthen our neighborhoods. So with that, with that sort of broad context, and I apologize for going on as long as I did, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
Thank you very much. Very helpful to understand the context and all the work that has happened already. I'll start with a few, and I'm sure I'm going to have more, but I don't want to monopolize the time. I also want to recognize that our colleague, District 6 City Councilor Matt O'Malley, has joined us as well. Thanks, Matt. So it seems clear to me that there's been a good deal of background work on the need for some decision, as well as the feasibility of, from the city services side, consolidating or sort of losing this site dispersing it out of city ownership. I'll get into that more later, but my biggest set of questions, I think, will be what the plan is for the site afterwards. Because there are, I mean, I would love more context on this, but it feels like there are few, if any, parcels like this left where the city has a potential major development opportunity. We saw Winthrop Square happen fairly recently. There's maybe Court Street, but but this, and Court Street is already a building, so it's a different scale of conversation. What is this? How many sites like this are left in city ownership that we would have this scale of development conversation over?
And Heather probably has a better, and Tricia may have a more specific answer. I think you're right that there are not that many parcels that are city-owned that are of this scale, that are this contiguous, and that have these attributes. I think there may be a handful, but this is certainly would be a small set. The interest in that is why sort of the city is pursuing an approach where, just sort of tactically, and Heather can talk more about this, the process would be that the city would sort of sign an MOA with the BPDA. So the BPDA would be the lead agent in the actual sort of public RFP process. We would make very clear in that MOA that for all the reasons that you cite, because this is such a critical parcel, that RFP process has to follow 30B procedures, that the proceeds go back to the city of Boston, that no determination or award is made without sort of a plan for the basic city services side of the house, and that RFP is actually very broad. This is a very sort of compelling opportunity, and so we want to make sure that coming out of Imagine Boston 2030 and everything that was cited there, that we are actually casting a wide net for great ideas about how we can really strengthen this area and strengthen this neighborhood in the city and be able to respond to some of the climate challenges which this particular parcel faces. I don't know if there's anything you'd...
So the request and your plan right now is to follow basically the exact same process as Winthrop Square?
Correct, yes. So the BRA has been asked to, after surplusing, basically oversee an open, competitive 30B disposition process, which would be kicked off with a request for proposals. We'd like to cast the net wide so that we can basically open it up and get the widest ranges of proposals and then evaluate based on a set of criteria.
And how many acres was Winthrop Square?
I think it was under 1 acre, actually.
Okay, so this is a massive site relative
yes, this is 18 acres. Yeah.
Okay, and again, one of the few remaining opportunities to really sort of cement some public use in an area of the city where there is less and less open space, there is more and more development, there are more and more transportation challenges and congestion. I know we've talked a lot about Imagine Boston 2030. Has there been any specific work on this parcel in terms of what you would require or what you would plan in terms of open space, height, affordability, anything like that?
There hasn't been any specific planning. The New Market area is one that was highlighted in Imagine Boston 2030 as an area for expanded growth. That planning process, that planning initiative is anticipated to be kicked off next year in 2019 with our planning department. They're obviously aware of this and will be helping us craft the RFP and obviously reviewing any proposals that come in. The planning process may coincide with the RFP process, but they will each inform each other and they will be coordinated together. But I think IB 2030 certainly highlighted this as an area of expanded growth and potential for economic opportunity, be it job creation, as Chief Osgood mentioned, increased connectivity specifically between the South End and South Boston. And so we would be looking at all of those parameters.
And affordability? And
correct, yes. If there was housing that was proposed from a development entity, we'd be looking for a mixed income, obviously. But we're hoping, again, to sort of cast the net wide and really get a wide range of proposals that we can evaluate.
And would the plan be to then choose a proposal, make sure it's squared with the plans for city services, and then rezone the parcel? What is the zoning currently?
The rezoning would probably happen concurrently, similar as we see with our large-scale Article 80 projects across the city. The site is planned development area eligible, so for a parcel of this size and potentially a project of this scale, a zoning overlay may be the right tool to use. That would obviously need BPDA board approval and zoning commission approval. But I don't think that we anticipate rezoning the site ahead of any development proposal. I think that would happen concurrently with an Article 80 large project review process.
Okay. Has there been an appraisal of this site?
There has not. We would anticipate doing an appraisal prior to releasing any request for proposals, and a second appraisal would be done approximately 4 to 6 weeks prior to going to the public facilities for a vote, so that we had an accurate valuation.
Okay. Have you considered other plans besides disposing of the full, selling the entire site? For example, long-term, 99-year lease where the city retains ownership, or carving it up into certain parcels if we know, for example, if there were more of a planning process first, that this is one of the few last opportunities for open space that would also help with some of the climate change concerns, to reserve that in city ownership and then only disperse part of a subdivided portion of the site.
Yeah, not speaking for the city, but my understanding is that they would be open to either a sale or a lease, whichever made more financial sense based on sort of the evaluation of obviously the services that are there now, where and when they would be relocated, and sort of how that process played out. I don't think we've had any discussions relative to subdividing the parcel. That's certainly something that we could continue discussions on, but I think the initial thought was to put out one RFP for the entire site and see what proposals came back.
Okay, so I know my colleagues have other questions, so I'm going to pass it on. I guess I'll just say that I think this is great that the city is thinking ahead and planning and trying to bring all these pieces together, and the connectivity, the climate change resiliency, the opportunities. The only problem I have right now is with the order of the process in terms of council participation sort of ending with this surplus decision when we don't have any appraisal figures, we don't know lease, sale, we don't know what the planned civic amenities will be. I, as chair of this committee, would be much more comfortable with planning happening first, maybe either through the RFI, RFP, whatever you wish, and then the council taking the decision later on. I think we have a pretty good example in Winthrop Square happening so recently in terms of how that type of process plays out, and therefore the opportunity to reflect on that and how, what we could have done differently in using this to really incorporate some of those learnings. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Councilor Wu, and thank you to the panelists for being here and presenting your proposal. If I could start with Chief Osgood. The facility at Frontage Road services the entirety of my district, provides high-quality services, basic city services to my constituents and to the other city councilors as well. That's my top priority, is basic city services, making sure that these basic city services, regardless of what changes do take place, these basic city services continue. For example, last night I was in Chinatown for 3 hours. There was an apartment, 30 apartments didn't have any cold water, but we had the water and sewer was working, the public works was there, the Boston Fire was on scene. But my point is all the city departments were working together, working hard. But I just want to make sure that if there are changes, and I expect there will be changes, what impact will that have on basic city services? Because as I said, that's my top priority.
Yep. So that is also my top priority. That is absolutely Mike's top priority, Gina's top priority. It is a top priority for the mayor. There's no question about that. That is our charge. And it is very clear that we will not move forward with any plan unless it actually sustains and strengthens basic city services. We do feel, and Mike and Gina can touch more on this, that doing nothing at this point is going to lead us eventually to a place where we're not going to be able to deliver services to any of your constituents as well as we do today. And that is something we experience, whether it's the AC going out in the morning or a snowstorm coming in and having our teams have to come in early to handle, to get vehicles ready to go out on the streets because of the way in which they're stored. That in order for us to keep doing what you want us to be doing every single day, to your point, change has to come, and we want to be able to plan for it proactively. What was that you guys want to add?
I would firmly second that. My small role here is to make sure that basic city services from the public works end, which, as you know, touches snow, litter baskets, code enforcement, waste reduction, street lighting is only strengthened by whatever happens in this process. In talking internally, Danny Nee, one of our top operational guys, said it best when he said, whatever happens here, we need to be better. Basic city service provider. And the great opportunity that the city has it touches us as well, and we will be better through this process.
Okay. Also, Chris, could you talk about the site itself, flooding in the area into the south end or South Boston? I was over there in January during that flooding, and I did witness the flooding over at the Frontage Road area. What impact will that have during this process of maybe transitioning, and what impact will that probably have on, if you do a RFP, having factored that into their plan as well?
Absolutely. So the Climate Ready Boston team, the team out of Energy, Environment, Open Space, is leading a set of planning efforts right now focused on the 4-point channel in South Boston, as you're well aware. This parcel, in their eyes, does play a critical role in thinking about flood protection, storm prevention in the future. There's going to be some work which they are looking at, which is further to the north up the 4-point channel, but this would play sort of an important sort of secondary role in both particularly for the south end side. And so no matter what we do, either on the basic city services side or through development, we are going to make sure that what we are building itself on that location is more resilient, and to the extent that can contribute to the overall resiliency of the neighborhoods that you represent, that we're absolutely going to make sure it advances that as well.
And Chris, if nothing took place, if we did nothing, we would continue to add more and more city money, capital money into Frontage Road. Yes.
I mean, again, we are already going to spend, we're slotted to spend around $9 million right now. $9 million is more than Beach Street. It's 3 times our Vision Zero budget. It's more than the Day and Ave Bridge. Like, this is a significant amount of money that we are using to do some really basic things like repair a sewer line, repair a water line, repair a curtain wall, make some fixes to the elevator, some just real bread and butter things. And our concern is that we're just going to, we see a significant list of similar things coming up in the future, and at some point, just reinvesting makes more sense than doing sort of a patchwork approach.
Okay, I have more questions. I'll just ask one more question, Chris, and then I'll let my colleagues ask some. I know you highlighted several departments that are in Frontage Road, and that will be impacted. But departments that aren't at Frontage Road, what type of communication will you have with them during this process? And can we also make sure that if the project does go forward, that a lot of these city departments, like the Parks Department, is part of the process? The one reason I ask is over the weekend I was in Chinatown watching Chinese men and women play volleyball at the Reggie Wong facility court. That's scheduled to probably be shut down. It's a state-owned property. But my point is, we're doing a huge project like this. Is there an opportunity for kids from Chinatown or South Boston or the South End that need open space, they need parks, we want to continue these volleyball programs? What impact will this type of project have on them?
So I think that it's similar to Councilor Wood's question. I think there's an opportunity here through the RFP process to think about how this really becomes a great asset within the city of Boston. Again, I'm of bias that I think it is a great asset already, but I appreciate the fact that there's a lot of things that your constituents would want to see sort of in their neighborhood that we may be able to provide out of a site like this. In terms of coordination and collaboration across departments, it's a great question. I think that is a really interesting opportunity in the sort of the programming study, which would be ahead, which would be led by Tricia's team. There's some interesting adjacency opportunities that were sort of flagged. If you think about us being, having at least some element of a footprint on Mass Ave, across or near 1010 Mass Ave, you do form that sort of that closer adjacency or synergy with both parks and with ISD and with the Boston Public Health Commission. If you think about being closer to water and sewer, similar to your example last night, there's an opportunity for us to sort of through physical proximity think about how we actually have a closer working relationship with those divisions or agencies. So I think that is exactly the sort of thing which we want to wrestle with over the course of this year. So as Mike said, or as Danny said, that we actually become better out of this process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor McCarthy?
Thank you very much, Councilor Wu. There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. I think the one thing I will say is, as somebody who's been in that building many, many times and spent many, many hours in that building, I think it might help to have actually a little council road trip to go over there and take a look at the building, for real. Because I think that unless you've been in that building, you really don't understand the empty space and useless areas that that building contains and how much better that building could be if you made it smaller and more efficient. You know, $27 million just a couple of years ago we spent. Now we're looking at another 21 in the next 24 months. It completely makes no sense to continue to sink money into this building, seeing that the building is actually sinking twice. And, you know, we're going to lose it ultimately. Just a couple of things that, you know, I think the opportunity is huge here. I think that the reality is that a true basic city services team, and I know Chris, Chief, and I have talked about this before, where everybody's under one umbrella, I think it's much more efficient. And I've always envisioned the district yards being reconstructed, you know, and if we did actually make money out of this deal, where whatever happened to that land after it was dispositioned, if we had a maintenance facility that we recreated, and it'd certainly be a lot cheaper than continuing to fix the monstrosity that's there now, the district yards could be redone. And if they were redone properly, you could have Public Works, obviously, Parks Department, code enforcement, and then actually traffic enforcement officers, and reporting to district yards. And my thought behind that has always been, you know, as a District 5 city councilor, if I call for, say, for parking issue, if traffic enforcement officers have to leave Frontage Road to get to Hyde Park at 7 o'clock in the morning, good luck. Like, good luck. It's going to take you an hour and a half. And by the time they get there, everybody who is illegally parked is probably going to be moved. And it's just, it's too much time traveling. And but if you had traffic enforcement officers or code enforcement officers, BTD, parks, as well as Public Works reporting to a direct yard, a really nice facility that was, you know, upgraded with electronics and top of the line, we'd have a much better basic city services team. It'd be easier, and the people, and you know, nobody can speak to it better than Mike can. You know, we have our contractors come in for snow. You know, we give them snow maps and with highlighters, and we try to get them to go where they want, because you can't say, hey, you know, go past Stop and Shop, and then they say, well, where's Stop and Shop? I'm from Peabody, you know. But if the guys and the women of the basic city services team are always in that same neighborhood, they know that neighborhood better than anybody, and then they give better service. So that's just a little of my little on the soapbox there. I apologize, but I think it's a tremendous opportunity. A couple questions regarding the site itself. As Councilor Wu stated, you know, the thought of shrinking that site down and rebuilding there might not be a bad idea, simply because of its central location. What happens to the clinic?
So that is now that is 300 Frontage Road, which is actually now the main administrative office for BTD on that location. So that has already moved out.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So that's for folks, that is essentially a building which is in the middle of the Frontage Road site.
Okay. And then secondly, as far as the citywide toll lot would go,
yes.
How would we work that out? If you shrunk down that lot area, and as you said, most of it's used for cars, would you build a parking garage, like a modern garage that would house more cars in a smaller areas that we'd try to do?
That's certainly one of the things you could take a look at. One of the things which, you know, in part for the tow lot, but actually in many ways much more for the city fleet, structured parking actually has a lot of advantages just in reducing the overall wear and tear and extending the useful life of our vehicles. So there's potentially some good financial payback of structured parking. I realize that's an odd thing to say in some of our other conversations, but it's something which it's useful for us to dive into.
Okay, great. You know, I really, you know, I will keep a close eye on the process, but you know as I stated to begin, I really believe that we should have a little bit of a road trip over there and let the councilors see it's awful. I mean, if you think City Hall's bad, it's got nothing on City Hall, that's for sure. So, yeah, I look forward to the process. We'll see where it goes. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would only quibble with the previous speaker's final line about City Hall being bad. I adore this beautiful, brutalist piece of art. So.
He's the one.
Wanted to thank you. I apologize for my tardiness today. I've gone through the PowerPoint presentation. We'll review the tape from earlier. But just wanted to echo sentiments made by all three of my colleagues, starting with Councilor McCarthy. 20 years ago, I interned on this very body for a former at-large councilor. I remember going to Frontage Road then, and the physical plant was dilapidated then, and that was 20 years ago. And despite that, the men and women who work there have done some remarkable stuff. But it's not a healthy, conducive place to work. It needs a lot of help. We have continuously put money into it. So I celebrate this opportunity. I think you all are going about it the right way. I'd also agree with the chair's remarks that it is vital that the council continue to play a role in this process. So I appreciate this opportunity and hope that as we go forward, we'll continue to not only have a seat at the table, but really work collaboratively. But this could be a remarkable opportunity for our city, for being innovative, being thoughtful as it relates to climate change and buildings. I will be pushing for, if a new building is indeed, or a new facility is built there, that we get to a net zero carbon place. That's something that we can do, that we ought to really be considering. There is a lot of land there, and I think that we should absolutely entertain the disposition process. There could be a way to build something new and innovative at little cost to the taxpayer, or offset some of the cost with selling some of the surplus land, because it is such a mammoth piece of real estate. So I don't have any questions other than to say this really represents a great opportunity for the city, for not only creating a more efficient workplace to make sure that we can serve our residents and our constituents with the exceptional service that you all have delivered, while at the same time being financially responsible and perhaps even turning a profit for the city of Boston. So I will continue to be engaged in this process and look forward to the weeks and months ahead. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. So just to dig in a little bit more into the idea that there are kind of multiple goals and moving pieces, yep. Are you saying that in order to move towards revitalization and potential consolidation or improvement, it has to be better, of the city services, that we need funding from the sale to be able to afford to do that? Or could that piece come first, separate from, and it sounds like there's urgency to do that anyway, separate from the actual disposition?
So it is not, I would say it's not a requirement, but it's a compelling opportunity. So the reality is, obviously, we need to reinvest. We can reduce our footprint. You can actually fund that reinvestment, or potentially a portion of that reinvestment, by thinking about how that development can help support that. So that is why these two things are sort of, in many ways, in parts linked together.
But does the scale of reinvestment or the type of reinvestment depend on what ends up happening with the disposition? For example, if the amount of money that comes in, yep. If it goes to a luxury, becomes luxury condos and a ton of money, then there's a different type output, yeah. In terms of public works building, yep. Versus if it's open space or, yeah.
So I will wait for Justin Starrett to yell something from over in the corner. But these things, at the end of the day, to your point, there is a separate effort, but we want to pursue them in a parallel track because we think that's probably the best route for the taxpayers. That is a way that we can actually do this without crowding out other things from our capital budget, which is already pretty constrained, and that's why these things are moving together. That said, if the most compelling opportunity that comes out of the broad RFP process is something which does not cover the costs that it needs for us to keep providing basic city services, until Justin sort of voices his veto, I think we're basically, we will find a way to ensure that we're delivering great basic city mm-hmm. services and doing something that really works for the city and for the neighborhoods with this parcel.
So helpful to know that there's not pressure on other parts of the budget, but not necessarily that you need to achieve a certain level of funding in order to Correct. Do the public services side exactly. Right. Okay. And then just in terms of location, do you have any cost estimates for the 6 alternatives that were explored?
Yep. So they put together some basic cost estimates. They all range basically between $150 and $175 million. If I recall correctly, and we can get you the detail, I think the 175 was the sort of rebuild, same site, same footprint cost. So all within a somewhat comparable range. I would want to say that, again, those 6 alternatives, the intent was prove feasibility that it's worth it for us to go forward. The actual like site selection process or design, programming, all that is that phase 2A, which we will then get to actual locations, actual footprints, actual numbers. So I just want to throw that caveat there.
So what's likely to drive that 2A process? Is it negotiating with communities who will receive the new locations and yards potentially, or something else?
Yep. So the mechanics will be something which would be led essentially by Trish's team, but in collaboration with us, which we would engage a party who would lead a site selection, programming, and design process. That is certainly a public process. It would engage all of you in figuring out where can we do sort of 2 key things. Where can we deliver great basic city services and be a great neighbor? Those are the 2 things we want to make sure that we are in this process. And that is going to be critical for that. So we want to dive into the details of how do we create great operational synergies, build the right type of environments, and find the right locations in neighborhoods, and have good neighborhood conversations to make sure that what we are building and where we are building make a lot of sense. I would also note that in the 6 alternatives that were explored, 4 of them do have some portion of the Frontage Road site remaining as a portion of this that which would probably have a little bit less of a community process, because right now it is the existing use, but we would actually want to be able to engage Councilor Flynn, since largely your constituents in the Frontage Road conversation, and all of your constituents in thinking about if we went with a more decentralized model.
So you mean one of the consolidation alternatives, 2 of the investment, and 2 site alternatives, and then the distribution across multiple sites? Okay. So the 2A does not depend on the parcel being surplused then, right? In some ways, because this is a conversation about city services that has to happen anyway, the administration can and probably is already proceeding with thinking about funding that's necessary and for the design and consultants to come in and all of that.
Yeah, technically. I think there's a value of sort of the transparency of it, that this is an action that we want to take. So I think there's that, but I think sort of legally 2A does not depend on, or sort of procedurally does not depend on that.
And would this then be so the consultants and everything would be in the next fiscal year's budget?
So we would be looking at potentially seeing if we can add that, and again, Justin can weigh in here, but that we would see if we can actually start that in calendar year 2019. So whether that's in FY20 or as an adjustment in the FY19 budget, it's something we'd likely take on in this upcoming calendar year.
Do you have any estimates for how much that contract would be at this point?
Trish, what would you say?
We're still in the process of scoping the services. Obviously, there'll be a great effort toward working with Public Works and Transportation and the other agencies out there to determine exactly what kind of operational impacts we can have. So those decisions will drive space needs. And so it may even be sort of a phased contract. I'm just not sure yet.
Okay. And that would come out of the public facilities budget? Or
one of our budgets.
Yeah. I didn't start okay, but just understanding, because we've already approved the budget for this fiscal year, if it needs to be moved around. All right. And then 2B, the actual development process. So again, can we just talk a little bit about the timing of surplus coming first versus RFP? In some of the previous surplus hearings that we've had, for example, have been told that the city has moved forward with certain RFPs without the surplus vote taking place prior to that, for example, with Plan Dudley.
So my sense, and Heather, you can certainly weigh on this, that the preference sort of procedurally is to surplus before the RFP. And one of the values of doing that is it gives a greater degree of certainty to RFP respondents. We think we'll simply get better responses if they know that with a degree of certainty this is something that the city, the council are serious about exploring. So that is, I think, a benefit that we would see by taking the surplus action at this point prior to the RFP rather than post. So.
Yeah. Although on that point, I would guess that how many other opportunities are there going to be to access an 18-acre site potentially? So it seems like an attractive opportunity with as long as the city is thinking about it. Yeah. And is there any thought? I guess, going back to the idea that we're learning from Winthrop Square in that process, at certain points in that process, it did feel that because a specific developer was already chosen and involved before all of the sort of procedural pieces were resolved, that added different pressures and different opportunities for community feedback and engagement. My concern with, again, doing the RFP this way before everything is sort of planned out to a certain degree of specificity is that we lose out on the guarantee that there will be a certain number of amount of open space, the guarantee that there will be a certain number of units of affordable housing, and we sort of leave it to the developers to suggest that as part of their, the attractiveness, but there's no kind of proactive way to specify what the civic benefit should be coming out of that.
It might be helpful if I could just run through sort of what our anticipated timeline is and sort of where there are opportunities for engagement, both from the council and also constituents and members of the public. So obviously the surplus vote is what we're asking for now. We would then propose to work on a draft memorandum of agreement with the city, between the city and the Boston Planning and Development Agency. That action would need to go to our board of directors prior to execution. So that's obviously an opportunity for the council to formally weigh in either verbally or in writing. We would then execute the MOA. We obviously have experience having done that through the Winthrop Square process, so we're not working from scratch there. And I think people were sort of pleased with how that agreement was structured initially. We would then go to the BPDA board for authorization to issue the RFP. This would be prior to the public facilities process, and so the goal here, I think, would be to have the selection process take place before public facilities, so that when it goes for a vote to public facilities, we have an idea of, to your point, Councilor, who the development team is, what the project proposal is, what the benefits are, and just sort of a better understanding all around of what we're hoping to see on the site. And so I think sort of having the process go in that order will allow for more clarity formally before any vote is taken.
And that's the exact same order as Winthrop Square, right?
Correct.
Okay. With the same exact opportunities for feedback or not feedback from the council. It's the same process you're imagining for RFPs and choosing one developer or one idea or one concept and moving forward after that and workshopping that, basically the exact same.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Any further questions from my colleagues? Yes. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Council Wu. As I highlighted earlier, Frontage Road is kind of at the heart of my district, District 2. It connects not only South Boston, the south end, Chinatown, but also the Leather District is in that area. Therefore, because it impacts almost my entire district, I would like to, be a key player as it relates to working closely with you, my colleagues, keeping my constituents and councilors aware of the site progress and development. I think it's important that I play a key role working closely with you as the district city councilor. So I just wanted to get your advice or suggestions about my comments.
Sure. So I think, and Heather can sort of amplify this, I think there are a number of opportunities for engagement. Obviously, this hearing, there's an opportunity to weigh in as well on the specifics of the MOA throughout the process of the BPDA board's release of the RFP, the public presentations of the RFP, any subsequent potential vote by the BPDA board, and then the PFC. There's opportunities to weigh in at each of those moments on your opinions on this. And I will sort of point out that I think there is one slight distinction between this process and the Winthrop Square process is the nature of the basic city services component of this. We will not move forward with a development if we don't have a great basic city services plan. There was not a sort of other use of Winthrop Square, and so there is a very large role that the council is playing in this process on the basic city services side, which in many ways is the key companion process to actually any sort of transformation on the through the BPDA and RFP process, which is important. And I do think, and I know you'd agree that with the Winthrop Square process, we are able to invest in Old Colony and Franklin Park and a number of parks across the city, and that it has been a good example of how a public asset can actually yield some greater public benefits through a public process that was led by the BPDA.
Heather, I just want to stress that this is important to me. It's important to my district, that I would need to be updated, be briefed as often as possible on what's happening in my district. I also have an obligation to inform my councilors and other constituents as well, but you know, I would like to play a key role in the dialogue and working closely with you, and that's something I would take very seriously.
Absolutely, Council. We look forward to doing that, whether formally or informally. We will keep those lines of communication open, and as you said, you can share with your other councilors along the way.
And what type of opportunities would there be for constituents to weigh in on this? Will their voices be heard? And if they are heard, what are you thinking about community meetings or feedback from residents, or how would they weigh in on the process?
Sure, I can speak to that. So once we receive the responses to the RFP, those will immediately go on our website, so they will be available for the public to view. Similar to what we did with Winthrop Square, we held a series of open houses and obviously allowed for any interested constituents, neighborhood groups, et cetera, to come and see the proposals and weigh in and give feedback to our staff. Once we sort of weigh all the proposals and make a decision about making a recommendation to our BPDA board as far as a designation goes, that BPDA board action is obviously an action that's well noticed, and that people are able to sort of comment on in writing, et cetera. But we anticipate a very thorough and open process leading up to any selection that would include conversations with the council and constituents, as I mentioned. Once a designation is made, that developer would need to go through Article 80 large project review. So I think the three of you have certainly weighed in on projects in your time here. You're familiar with the process, but a letter of intent would be filed, an impact advisory group would be formed with input from you as far as who those members are. And we would anticipate a series of filings from the development team, which would have their own series of analysis, both in-house with city staff, but also their own sort of public process and public meetings, meeting with neighborhood groups, discussions with the impact advisory group regarding impacts and mitigation and the like. So that process will play out as any other project in and around the city that triggered large project review would, and would need a vote from the BPDA board ultimately as well. That BPDA board meeting, that agenda item would more likely than not actually be a public hearing, given the size and scope of this project and the potential zoning mechanism that may be used. So there would be another formal opportunity for people to actually come and speak to our board and provide formal feedback. And then post BPDA board, presumably a zoning commission action, which that would be its own public hearing as well. So there are multiple opportunities, both formally and informally, for both the council to weigh in and also members of the public to weigh in, engage with our staff and give feedback. And we look forward to that process. And our staff is obviously well versed in that regard.
No, I appreciate your comments, and you know, BPDA being as transparent as they can. Could I ask or make a request during this process? You know, it's close to West Broadway, public housing, which has a high concentration of Spanish-speaking. Mm-hmm. It's very close to Chinatown, high concentration of Mandarin and Cantonese-speaking. The cathedral as well, Spanish, high concentration of Spanish-speaking, and Villa Victoria. Could we make sure that when we're doing community outreach that we have the necessary translators and and we have some meetings specifically in those locations, so it makes it easier for some of those residents to participate in the process as well. And many in Chinatown, especially the elderly, don't use computers often. So if we can also communicate with them directly.
Absolutely.
And I can help on that process as well.
Absolutely.
Then the final question I had, Mike, I know the principal salt pile is at Frontage Road. When that is moved or eventually moved, what impact will it have, or what are you thinking about in terms of locating the salt pile to another location that makes it easy for every neighborhood to access it?
Sure. So currently, right now in that footprint, when we start filling it up, which gets to 17,000 tons by 1st of October, that pile, to your point, hits South Boston, hits the South End, hits Charlestown, hits Chinatown, hits Back Bay, Bay Village, portions of Melnia Cass, and also some of our citywide thoroughfares, the Dot Ave, we call them main routes. But it's a concern of where that pile goes. It's a concern of mine of how we can still provide the same treatment of Telegraph Hill as we can Bunker Hill, as we can Melnia Cass. So it's probably the bulkiest move of this as far as the basic city service piece is. It's salt. It's not, it's not glorious and it's cumbersome, but many of the options here are appealing to me as a basic city service provider, some of them more than others. But my care and concern will be where that 4-month, 5-month of the year service is provided out of. And hopefully through this process, to our points earlier, it'll be a better operation, whether it be in a better facility from which to load and deliver from. We've seen some great examples across the country of siloed. We don't need front-end loaders. That's one less heavy machinery that we have to staff and account for. It could actually be dispersed that way. But through this process, my chief concern is just that question. We will not provide a weaker service when it comes to those 4 to 5 months of the year. It'll be a main point in, I guess, my small role in this.
Thank you, Michael. And I guess just my final question. Started asking so many questions, but to Commissioner, do you have any comments on, during this process, what impact will transportation play as we navigate trucks coming into Frontage Road and leaving Frontage Road, and how are we going to, notify the neighborhood of what changes are taking place as it relates to traffic? Are we able to, if trucks are going into Frontage Road frequently and then throughout the neighborhoods, are we able to take a look at what roads these trucks will travel and maybe decreasing the speed limit of trucks while they're passing through the neighborhood, or just long-term planning or thinking on your behalf of what you expect?
Yes, Councilor, we would certainly work with the community as well as with MassDOT and with BPD to identify how best to manage both the work that needs to be done on the site in terms of whatever happens to it if there is a construction phase with traffic management plans. It would certainly minimize the disruption to the community and to the general public, both with the weight and the size of the vehicles, and identify routes that would be safe both for the operators of those vehicles and folks working on the site, as well as the residents and the general public that also need to navigate those roadways.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor McCarthy?
Thank you very much, Councilor. Just a couple of things just to kind of wrap up. On the best practices slide, is there a chance I can get a list of like the facilities you looked at? Yeah, absolutely. Just because, I like to get my hands on things like that. Secondly, when you go ahead through the first process, are you taking them both as one huge lot, 400, and then 200 and 300, or are you separating them, the yellow and the red, like you're doing now?
That was more just to help you explain.
Just to show where it's
Exactly.
at?
Right.
Yeah, because like I look at it and I'm thinking, in my own mind, if you built your new facility at 200 and 300.
Correct.
If you moved Commissioner Fee and Docket stuff over to, and then you moved it back when it was completed, then you wouldn't have an upgrade, and you wouldn't have any lapse of service, and then you'd be able to move 400 Frontage Road through the process, you know what I'm saying?
So that essentially, what you just outlined is sort of consolidation option of the southern end of Frontage Road. That was one of the UTL sort of feasible alternatives.
Because the Kazaza building clearly is the building that would be better for, you know, whatever development you're looking for, right? Whether it's hotels or a neighborhood or whatever.
Right, the northern end probably has, again, that transit accessibility, that link between neighborhoods. It is also the building which has some more inefficient spaces and has some more structural concerns. The southern end is one experiencing currently some flooding and some serious operational limitations in terms of just the available space. Yeah,
and Councilor Flynn asked the question that I was going to ask Mike too with the salt pile. I mean, we'll probably go to silos at some point, but again, if we sunk the money into our district yards, we'd be able to have bigger salt sheds than our district yards. You may be able to take that pile down a decent percentage point too. So, all right, it's going to be an interesting path. Thanks, Council.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. I had put out a little notice on social media that this was happening and got some questions during the hearing, so I want to touch on some of those constituent questions. Is there Chapter 91 issues here?
So the northern sort of 50,000 square feet are sort of within a Chapter 91 area, so it would go through the sort of traditional Chapter 91 process.
Okay. South Bay Harbor Trail?
Yep.
Is that part of the consideration for the planning?
Yes, I mean, I think actually there's a really interesting opportunity to think about. Obviously, as you know, we are doing a stretch of the South Bay Harbor Trail right now, which actually would be adjacent to this parcel and the crossings of the West 4th Street and the Travelers Street bridges, and then the sort of the connection up towards the Gillette site. I think, though, that we have a really interesting opportunity here to think about what that Albany Street to Frontage Road to South Boston connection looks like. If you thought about that parcel in a different way, and that parcel was a parcel that was permeable as opposed to what it is today, where members of the public can't really sort of course through an active public works yard.
And then a question on the larger Woodette Circle plan, and this being a portion of that very large area that's been talked about a lot since the Olympics effort.
So as I mentioned earlier, statements, this will be its own new market planning initiative, which we're hoping to kick off next year. Any proposal.
And does that planning initiative how large does that one?
I'm not sure if they actually have the site boundary identified at this point. I think we know the general parameters, but as far as a specific geographic boundary, I don't think that we're there yet.
Okay. And then just one last question on the timing of council and surplus votes. So legally, the council wouldn't need to, I mean, you've expressed a preference for greater certainty to have this done before the RFP goes out, but legally the council would not need to surplus until right before the Public Facilities Commission vote. Is that correct?
I would defer to the law department then, as you know, rather than sort of my legal opinion. The reason, though, we are pursuing this approach is that we think it has a number of just benefits. It's the preferred procedure from our law department. It does offer that public transparency and internal transparency about what we're doing, and we think it gives greater certainty through the public RFP process. And frankly, we know that we want to move on the basic city services side. This is something that we want to wrestle with actively. We think this allows us to be able to take that step more concretely, which is why we put it into step one.
But there are other examples of the city moving forward without having the surplus vote in place within our RFP.
Others are going to know that better than I am.
Yeah, I think, so back to your earlier question, Councilor, about the Dudley parcels. My understanding is the only parcel that was not surplus was the municipal lot, and that's due to the fact that it has different regulations for the Parking Facilities Board. So I think the other parcels, the RFPs have not gone out, and the one that was not surplus is a municipal lot, and that obviously has its own sort of regulations and process that needs to occur, which sort of prevented the surplus from taking place.
Okay. So I guess my general feedback is just I think it's such an important opportunity for the city for so many reasons that we've all talked about, and particularly because there are so few opportunities like this left for the city to be thinking about, that the council's role is to, you know, in a general scale, to be the voice for constituents, but very specifically our role is to oversee any appropriations and the financing and spending that the city does. And so there are pieces here that do implicate that very clearly, whether it's the consultants being brought in and where in the budget that comes out of. But then how much money are we getting out of this, where, and how much non-monetary benefit, civic benefit are we requiring from this? I would push very, very strongly for detailed planning to happen before the RFP goes out. My biggest problem with the Winthrop Square process was that the developer was chosen and the developer drove the entire vision for the site. I guess in that process you could argue that the vision sort of generally was always that it would be a downtown office building, and it was a question of how high and where and details. This presents even more of a limitless or less limited scope of what could be possible here. So rather than having a developer or a number of respondents to an RFP drive that, the city has the capacity, the staff, the responsibility to do the planning first and figure out what exactly we want, what civic amenities, what civic benefits we want to guarantee coming out of that. We're in the midst of this housing crisis. We're in the midst of the opiate crisis. We are in the midst of a traffic and transportation growing challenge. That all those pieces have to be lined up, I think, from in the eyes of the public before we move to engaging a specific developer. That's my general feedback. Obviously, there are many other counselors here. So unless you all have any responses or other comments, I think we're good in terms of the hearing. Any other last statements?
We appreciate your time and your engagement, and again, look forward. There are many steps ahead. We agree with you about the importance of this, both from the basic city services side and from the neighborhood side, and look forward to working with you on all the steps ahead.
Thank you all very much. This will bring to a close the hearing on docket number 1087, message in order to declare surplus city-owned former Public Works Department parcels of vacant land along Frontage Road in South Boston. This hearing is adjourned.